On this episode of Shutter Nonsense, two blustering Americans bark at a quivering Brit like overexcited puppies, while Murray Livingston appalls poor Jeffrey by declaring mid-tone contrast the very spawn of Satan. Meanwhile, Michael jabbers on like a malfunctioning parrot. Again! On that bombshell, toddle off to the Shutter Nonsense Patreon madhouse to endure more of these complete Muppets inane prattling in the free community discussions, where you can ask questions and share your thoughts about the episode. Anyways, let's start the show, shall we?
All right, welcome to episode 10, the big 1-0 of Shutter Nonsense. It's another exciting milestone that we keep hitting here. We're just cranking them out.
Yeah, we made it.
We made it. We are official.
We are.
So in this one, we're going to be talking about kind of how our post-processing approaches have changed over time, and also get into the pros and cons of working with JPEG versus RAW, and when one may be better or more appropriately suited over the other one. But as always, let's just kick this off with our little personal updates. Jeffrey, what you got going on of late?
Another YouTube video this week, which is pretty normal. And then just a little bit of a change for me. I still photograph some running races here and there for people that either know me and know I did it or I've done it long enough. So I am, again, podcast timeline, photograph a 4th of July race. And
and this is going out in September, October.
Right, exactly. So yeah, but anyways, the 4th of July race, I'm going through that. That usually results in like thousands of photos. And it's funny that we're going to be talking post-processing because that's sort of what I've been going through, just cleaning things up a little bit and finding the right line for that. But yeah, I am neck deep in getting some photos uploaded later today for the race. And
nice.
That's what I've been up to. Oh, and trip planning.
Trip planning, yeah.
So
that national park that I keep forgetting the name of.
Yep.
You know what else is funny? You said it's funny that we're talking about this topic today. You know what else is funny?
I think I see you based on the pop-up.
It's Murray!
Hey, what's up, Murray?
Hello, guys.
Hey.
How you doing, man?
Yeah, very well. How are you?
Good. So, big surprise, Jeffrey.
Yeah, another surprise. I'm all like, I saw the little people thing go red, and I'm like, what's going on? Then I got the pop-ups. There's a special guest waiting. I'm like, Michael's doing it again.
Michael's doing it again. I keep throwing these guests in here more frequently than I say we're going to, but yeah, why not? They're fun.
Yeah.
So I have to admit,
Exactly,
Murray, you are my second choice. I asked Alex Armitage if he would join, and he said it was too early in the morning for his West Coast
Too early.
timeline
It's
right
only
now.
like
So
like 9 o'clock
it's
out
9
there.
a.m. It's 9 a.m.
You'll have to settle for second best, I
Yeah,
guess.
no, you're far from second best. If
What
anything,
time is
you're
it?
better.
What time is it for
Screw
you,
Alex?
What time is it for you, Murray?
It is, it's 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Which, yeah, I thought, we'll get one of these going, right?
Oh, he's busting out the booze. Now we're gonna get age
This is,
restricted.
Yes.
This is the right podcast. Isn't it?
Yeah.
It can certainly fit in. You're talking to the two non-drinkers for the most part. Although I had a drink. We just had our 10th anniversary dinner earlier this week, and I was telling Jeffrey we each had one drink. They gave us free champagne, and then we each ordered a drink, and we both woke up the next morning feeling horribly hungover. So we are definitely in that middle-aged lightweight stage.
Yeah, if you're not used to it, certainly.
Woe is us. So yeah, anyways, I thought, Murray, you'd be a good choice to have on here as well. I was thinking Alex originally just because he's been doing some videos and talking a lot recently about doing like film recipes and shooting straight out of the camera and comparing some different cameras in terms of how they look without editing, which would certainly be a change in approach for him and others over time. But you've also gone through a change in your approach with going from being really just a black and white photographer to now you're doing a mix of things. So I thought you'd have some worthwhile insights to bring into the mix. But first, before we get into that, I think you just so you listened to episode 1. Is that the first one you've listened to?
I listened to episode 1 and then episode 4
okay.
on AI. So
Very nice. So you've got a little bit of an idea of what this is what nonsense this is like.
Well, that's why I cracked open the beer. I knew it was sort of something a little bit more casual.
I think what he's saying, Jeffrey, is it sounds like we are drunk on all of these. Yet we're stone cold sober.
Yep. It's the podcast we want to be, right? Nice and casual, and yeah.
Right.
Exactly right. Yeah.
So anyways, Murray, we had just kicked off. Jeffrey just went through his little kind of what has he been up to of late spiel. So if we want to kick it over to you, let us know. I know you just got back from, well, you had your big trip in South Africa, which I'd love for you to talk about. And then you had your hiking trip that unfortunately came to a sad end, which you're welcome to touch on as well. But why don't you touch on those? Anything else you want to share with the audience? Keeping in mind this is going out in October, I think.
Yeah, podcast timeline.
The odd timeline.
So confusing.
You guys are well ahead of schedule.
Oh no, this will be September. So Patreon members will have it September 16th. So it's a little bit closer to now than what I was thinking it was.
Well, I mean, regardless, I was in South Africa for 2.5, 3 months, and I did a few big hikes, had some big workshops out there, sort of 2 weeks on the road, and then a bunch of wildlife photography, which is perhaps, I heard you guys talking about nature versus landscape, and I'm certainly, I guess, a nature photographer, considering that I also shoot wildlife.
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm the old school landscape. I just call it landscape. And I photograph wildlife if it wanders into my landscape shot, but that's it.
Yeah.
That's pretty much my extent these days, too.
But then the last 2.5, 3 weeks, I've been back up in Scotland, which is that's where I spend most of my time doing landscape photography. And hosting a few workshops up there. And then, as you mentioned, Michael, went on, or tried to go on, a nice little camping trip, and sadly had a bit of gear stolen. Thankfully, not my camera.
A little more than a bit.
A bit more than a bit. But
fortunately, not your camera gear, but all your camping gear.
Yeah. So I still got all the shots from the morning.
Yeah,
which
that's what really matters.
That's what's keeping me going right now.
Yeah, and then jumping back to South Africa. So you did a pretty special hike. Or backpacking trip there too. You want to touch on that a little bit?
I did a 95-kilometer hike through a remote canyon in Namibia. Not South Africa, but
that's right. Yeah,
I was based out of South Africa for the time that I was out in that part of the world, and something like 53 people have been known to walk this canyon. So it was a huge privilege to be able to go out there. And it was, something else, man. It was just like floating on sand. You're walking through this temporal river system, and you got the Namib Desert coming in from one side and mountains coming in from the other, and it's sort of the confluence of these two ecosystems. So it's a really interesting place. Got all these beautiful trees lining the riverbed. It's a little bit like Utah meets Africa.
Wow.
So I still haven't edited those photos. Speaking of editing, the backlog is getting out of hand at the moment.
Yeah, well, you've been doing a lot of travel and then all the photography on top of it, so I can imagine. Yeah, that sounds like an awesome trip. Definitely anxious to see what you came away from there. And for the rest of the Yanks listening to this, that's 59 miles. I just did a quick conversion on my phone. So 95 kilometers or 59 freedom units. So. Anything else you got coming up, Murray, that you want to share? Any workshops that you're still trying to book for later in the year?
Yeah, considering, if this is going out in September, maybe we might have sold out by then, but there's 3 places coming up, or 3 places left for an autumn weekend creative retreat in Scotland's Caledonian Pine Forest. Yeah. So we've got me and Brad Carr, he'd be another good guest to get on.
Yep.
He's an interesting guy. And we're going to do a weekend in the woodland shooting autumn color. So that'd be a good one if anyone's interested.
Yeah, I really like Brad's work, and I'm thinking I've bought so many books. I feel like he did a
Year
zine
Amongst Trees.
Yeah. This is terrible. I should know.
You have to actually look at those photo books, Michael. Like we've talked about before, you collect them.
I know.
You have to actually open them as well.
Sarah Marino's listening to this right now, just like there's a single tear trickling down her face as I talk about I'm still not looking at books. I'm I'm doing better. I actually read it wasn't a photo book this morning, but I sat on the sofa and read a book series I'm working through right now. So yay me,
So
baby steps. Maybe next I'll pick up a photo book.
Quick question for Murray. Do you consider, you mentioned retreat, and that sounded like a deliberate word as opposed to workshop. Do you see that? Is it a difference? Is there something, what makes a retreat different from a workshop in your eyes or for this experience?
I suppose part of that is branding and trying to differentiate between some of my different offerings. So I definitely do sort of adventure workshops, which are more, hiking, camping, all that good stuff. And then wanting to make it really clear that this other kind of workshop that I offer is a lot more low key. And typically the way I differentiate it is that a retreat is based in a single location.
Gotcha.
So it often means revisiting locations time and time again, taking clients back to the same, whether it's a beach or a woodland, and exploring different ideas in the same place.
Gotcha.
And sort of, I guess, a little bit of like a deeper dive into maybe a little bit of the psychological or mental aspects of photography and getting to know someone a little bit better on a deeper level. So I think there's maybe a little bit bigger of a artistic commitment if you're going to sign up to a retreat, whereas an adventure workshop, there's obviously a lot more going on, going out into wilderness and doing sort of the whole camping experience.
Gotcha.
That's a bit more of a physical commitment in some ways.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, I think my middle-aged body is more on the retreat side of things.
I don't know. I'd love to go do
the other reason,
one of Murray's trips.
The other reason I invited you, Murray, is you were kind enough to mention my slimmed down appearance. So I figured what better way to reward you than by having you on the podcast.
Flattery gets you far.
Yeah.
Flattery gets you far. I haven't weighed myself this week, but I'm bouncing right on that 20 pounds lost borderline, I think. So hoping to go another
huge congrats, man.
5 to 10. Yeah. It's amazing how much better you feel. I've done this is like third time I've gone through this like drift up over time in my weight and then drop it off. And every time I'm like, man, it's so crazy how much better I feel. And then you forget about it. You put the weight back on. Maybe I can actually stick with it this time. It's my goal as I get far closer to 50 than I like. I'm going to try to keep the weight off going forward. So anyways, yeah, great to have you on, Murray. As far as I go, I've been working podcast stuff. I'm coming up on, like Jeffrey said, getting ready to leave for my big Colorado trip. So I just got my new custom built sleeping platform and storage doors for the Forerunner yesterday that we talked about in the car camping episode. So I've got to get all that stuff installed, ideally properly installed, and that it's actually bolted down and together instead of just randomly sliding around the back of my truck on bumpy roads, or if I hit the brakes or the gas too hard. So that's my project for the rest of the day. I've got some stuff just prepped out for while I'm gone, kind of running on autopilot. I got my NLPA submissions in for my raw verifications this morning, so that's out of my hair. And I keep saying I'm going to sit down and do some editing, but instead I've sat down and started redesigning some of my website like an idiot. So,
going to say you were website work earlier this week.
Yeah, we'll call that my editing, but some of it long overdue stuff I've been wanting to do, but also some of it just project avoidance, I guess you could call it. So, but anyways, I don't have a ton else to report, so let's just shift over to the topic of the episode, which is those post-processing approaches over the time. One thing I wanted to start off with, and Jeffrey, you kind of, I can't recall if you straight out said it already or if you alluded to it with your race weekend, but for anybody listening to that is maybe shooting JPEG and you haven't gone into the world of shooting RAW, I think it's important to note that there is nothing that dictates that if you want to be a good or a great photographer or get fulfillment out of photography, there's nothing stating you absolutely must shoot in RAW. RAW gives you more flexibility in terms of your processing if you want to do that. But I just want to preface all of this conversation with, if you want to just shoot JPEG, perfectly fine, nothing wrong with that. I can't remember where I saw it just recently, but it was some comments on maybe somebody posted about a presentation that they were doing or they just wrapped up, and somebody had commented like, oh, I've never shot RAW, but I'm gonna maybe dip my toe into the water, kind of coming across with a vibe of like, I don't know that I want to do this, but I feel like I'm supposed to do this kind of thing. So again, a long-winded way of saying you don't have to shoot RAW. JPEG is plenty capable depending on your needs and what you're intending to get out of, especially if it's just a hobby. RAW is perfectly fine. On the flip side of that, though, I will say there are some photographers who are very vocal about just shooting JPEG and claiming it as unedited, or they don't do any editing on their files. And that is a pure either lie or pure ignorance as I point my finger at the camera, because the JPEG is edited. Gosh darn it. You're relying on the camera manufacturers to do the editing for you, essentially. So that's my little soapbox rant, too. 'Cause I know there's been some photographers out there that have been very, very kind of, I don't want to ruffle feathers, but to me it comes a bit pretentious in that, oh, well, I shoot strictly JPEG and I don't do any editing. Yes, you do. You pick which JPEG profile you're using and all that within your camera settings. So, and technically even a RAW file is edited by the time you're seeing it on your screen, because the software you're using has got to translate it from
into that.
Right. Yeah. It's got to go from zeros and ones and bits of data into something that can be visually presented on your screen. So, anyways, just
I think it's
caveats and rants out of the way.
No, I think it's an important point, though. I mean, some of my workshops, especially some of my one-day ones, some of these folks haven't shot in RAW, and I actually tell them, it's nice to have the RAW file, but I get it. If you typically don't do a lot of editing, and I coach them to, let's set RAW plus JPEG, and then if you get home and you're like, I don't want to do this work, I don't want to open Lightroom because I just want a pretty picture, and today's cameras can do it so well. They've got the option to just use the JPEG, or they have the RAW if they decide they want to play with it. But I think there's a lot of people that don't necessarily want to do a whole lot of work to it. They just want to capture the moment as well as they can. And again, with modern cameras these days, little tweaks, little adjustments, you can walk out with a pretty decent image just from the JPEG. So, I think it's an important point. Even, I like RAW and have RAW. And to your point, that race I shot, most of those are bulk, lots of photos, and I'm not going to edit a ton of them. So I shoot them in JPEG for the most part, except for a couple critical moments where I want to make sure I have a RAW in case I mess something up. But other than that, 90% of those photos are going to be the straight RAW, out of camera, minimal stuff to it, just because of the type of photography it is. And the photos are good. No one really knows I'm necessarily doing that. So,
yeah, and using the raw steak analogy that we've used before, like, if you're shooting JPEG, you're basically letting somebody else cook your steak to whatever they want to do with it. And you're picking it off the menu in terms of, well, I think this will meet my taste or whatever. Whereas with a RAW file, you're cooking the steak, you're seasoning it yourself, et cetera, et cetera. And you've got more flexibility with the RAW file in terms of the editing and shadow and highlight recovery, which is the big drawback to shooting in JPEG, right? Is everything's baked into the file. I will say, like, several years ago, I went to the zoo and I spent several hours there just photographing with my big Tamron 150 to 600 when I was practicing with it. And as I was walking out of the zoo, I looked down and realized I'd done the entire shoot in JPEG against my wishes. Somehow, I don't know how I did it, but anyways, I had accidentally flipped it to JPEG. But I was still able to do some fairly significant adjustments to those files. So it's not that JPEG is just, it's completely set in stone, you're not going to be able to do any kind of editing. You can still do, and it probably varies from camera to camera and certainly profile to profile on any individual camera, but you can still do some fairly significant adjustments with the JPEG, but it is going to be far more limited than what you've got with the raw data, where you're basically starting out from a flat file, so to speak, and building it up yourself.
Limitations when you're dealing with a JPEG versus a RAW.
Right.
But I suppose my point of view is more like, composition and everything else that goes into that, making that photographing it in the right conditions. And then, Michael, you've talked about sort of being part of the, I guess, witness tradition and wanting to keep things as real as possible. And I guess maybe that's a good argument for shooting in JPEG if you don't want to deal with editing, because it's going to force you to try and make photographs in the right conditions and the right lighting.
Right.
Because you're not going to have to then go in and tweak things or add light that wasn't necessarily there on a RAW file. A JPEG's maybe a little bit more like shooting film back in the days. It's sort of keeping you closer tied to reality.
Right. Yeah, and I think film's a great analogy for JPEG. It's, your different profiles and shooting in JPEG in terms of what you're selecting on the camera. That would be the equivalent to choosing a different film that's warmer or cooler. Yeah, exactly. I think that's a great point to bring up too. And to be honest, like, part of me has thought, like, I don't think I would do it for my portfolio work, but it might be a fun challenge to go probably more so locally and just do an outing and shoot in JPEG. I will say, though, that even shooting in JPEG on my Canon, even when I load them into Lightroom, and I have my Lightroom set so that the camera matching profile is automatically applied at import instead of like the Adobe standard, which I think would otherwise be your normal default. So it matches what I saw on the back of my camera pretty well. And it's Adobe trying to match it as best as they can since they don't have the proprietary access or whatever that the camera manufacturers have. But even with that profile applied, which should be pretty close to what the JPEG version would look like if I had shot that way, it still is a little lacking. So even with my style that tends to be a lot of lower contrast work a lot of times, or quiet or light, whatever, I still find that I want to play with it a fair bit in Lightroom while still keeping that representation of what I see. The other thing to consider, though, too, is I assume most cameras allow this. Mine certainly does, and I believe Nikon does as well. But you can create your own profile on the camera. For instance, I've created a black and white profile that matches the red filter black and white profile in Lightroom, aka the Ansel Adams effect, where you're going to get the darkened sky and some of the elements in the landscape brighter than what they would be otherwise. So you've got that ability too, that maybe that's a little bit of a middle ground where you've got still that desire for some creativity, but maybe none of the included manufacturer profiles for JPEG match with what your creative wants are. Go in and try one of your custom profiles on the camera and set it up. And again, it's just goes back to that whole just play around and try it out. Storage is cheap. Lessons learned are valuable lessons for further down the path. So try it out and see what you like and tweak it as needed. So we've got that piece out of the way. You don't have to shoot RAW. Gives you more flexibility, but don't feel guilty or feel as if you're not a proper photographer or a serious photographer if you're shooting just JPEG. And I guess the last thing I would say on this point is, especially when you're starting out, and Murray, you kind of just touched on this, is, you know what? Before you're adding more complexity in the mix, start out shooting RAW, or start out shooting JPEG.
The truth comes out.
My own, my big point, I screwed it up. Start out shooting JPEG. Focus on, like Murray was saying, getting the right conditions, getting the right light, honing your compositional skills. Because you can shoot in RAW and you can have the best editing skills in the world, but if your compositions aren't solid, or if you're shooting in less than ideal light for the scene, it's not going to matter whether you shot in RAW or not, because the fundamentals, the foundation of the photo aren't quite there yet. Yeah. So focus on the, I guess, the more artistic skills first in terms of the field craft. And then once you feel comfortable there, if you want to switch to RAW, I think that's a good time to do so. And then you can, you're building up in layers instead of just jumping all in at once. So I guess let's kick this back to you, Murray. We mentioned you'd been primarily a black and white photographer, and you've shifted over the last several years. I guess talk to what drove you at the start to focus primarily on black and white, and then what's kind of led to you branching out into more of a variety of black and white and color.
My initial entryway into photography was with black and white film. So that was what I started with in high school. I took a year of black and white darkroom photography, and it was all shooting Ilford 400 and developing everything in the darkroom, making prints, silver gelatin prints, and the whole shebang. And so that was kind of what I fell in love with initially. And so I carried that forward throughout my sort of initial photography progression. And eventually, when I did get a digital camera, I just continued the black and white because that was, that's what I was comfortable with. That's where I knew how to express my ideas and my feelings and everything through the camera. And so it wasn't until maybe 6 or 7 years of being solidly black and white only, I started to there was an image or two where, you take it into Lightroom and it doesn't immediately, at least when I had it on, it wasn't immediately a black and white conversion. It was color first, and then I was changing it. And there was a few images where I saw the color raw preview and I was like, this is actually a little bit painful to turn this into black and white. So there was some where I shot them as black and white in the field, and then I came back and was like, okay, I'm going to do a color version, dip my toe in the water, so to speak. And it kind of just trickled from there. There's sort of a bit of a snowball effect. I actually had a good call with a professional photographer here in the UK who, at the time when I was trying to sort of transition into professional photography full time, and he gave me some good advice that in today's world, being commercially viable means we probably need to be shooting color and black and white. At least if you're going to be doing education, because realistically, most of your clients are going to be shooting in color.
Right.
And so being able to teach them and coach them how to make better color photographs, you've got to be able to have that skill yourself. And that was probably a really big spur on for me to take it a little bit more seriously. And so I did for about a year. And then I guess I kind of fell in love with color photography out of that process and trying to take it a bit more seriously.
Yeah.
And now I find I'm probably shoot about 85% of my work is now in color.
Yeah.
And it's turned into something where I've become a lot more intentional about whether it's color or black and white. You know, whether I'm working on a specific project and I'm trying to use that color in order to inform the story I'm trying to tell, then, you know, that's something that I'm really taking into consideration. And black and white is exactly the same. You know, if it's just about a pure raw emotion or a particularly dramatic scene, then perhaps I'm considering something more in black and white. Yeah, but it's been a progression, and the mix has certainly been interesting. I think most people nowadays are either one or the other. So being able to shoot both is potentially a fairly unique thing in today's photography world.
Yeah. I think the biggest shift for me in my black and white is being able to actually identify in the field, in the moment, when I want to do something in black and white, and even flip it to a black and white profile on the camera to help me better see what I'm actually going to come away with, as opposed to in the past. And a lot of people kind of fall into this, I don't know if it's a trap per se, but it's maybe a weaker photo in color. Your composition is not quite what it should have been, or your lighting is just not great. For me personally, I look at black and white as it's an in the moment way of seeing the scene and knowing whether it's textures or light or just how I want to convey the mood of the scene or whatever, that, hey, this fits black and white. But also I've talked in writing and image captions, like I feel like I've got more liberty in the processing side of things when I'm shooting in black and white, because I'm already quote unquote misrepresenting the scene because I'm shown in a black and white. So there I will get much more aggressive in terms of pushing and pulling contrast and light and shadow and emphasizing texture, de-emphasizing texture, heavier vignetting, the whole bit. Whereas I might relay my color processing to more of like a painting approach and building things up very gradually. And when I do one-on-ones or what have you, I talk about subtle. You know, people that have done Lightroom one-on-ones with me probably get sick of hearing the word subtle, because I'm very much all about those subtle adjustments when it comes to my color processing. But I look at my black and white processing almost more as like wood carving. I'm going to be a lot more aggressive in terms of what I'm doing with the file. Not always, but again, depending on the image, be a lot more aggressive with that. Now, one caveat throughout too, you mentioned, Murray, that getting files back on the computer and seeing the color version of it and realizing you like it. What camera system are you shooting with?
Well, at the time I was on a Nikon, but a D750, so DSLR days. Okay. And I purposely, as you mentioned, started out using that black and white preview. And then I actually switched that off because I found that when you're working with black and white files, you've got a different set of tools available to you. And one of the tools that you need to be aware of is the color information. So if you preview a scene in black and white, you're actually losing one of the senses that's going to allow you to potentially make a successful photograph, which is color contrast.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't looked at it that way. And I guess even from a data standpoint, I've got my color histogram on my camera. So when I'm doing, my live view and then on my image review, it shows the red RGB, red, green, blue channels for my histogram. So I guess to your point too, if you're shooting on a black and white profile, you're only seeing the single histogram value, which means you could be clipping a channel that maybe you don't realize. So interesting. I'll have to keep that little nugget in the back of my head. Anyway, the main reason I asked about what camera system you're on is Jeffrey knows this all too well. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of the crop, aren't I?
Yeah, the crop is terrible.
Nikon's bake the crop into the file,
Yes.
but
Yeah.
you can still switch from color and black and white. Okay.
Yep, we're good there. It's our crop is what's the pathetic part of the Nikon system there.
I was getting crop and profile confused.
So
Us Canon users don't even have a 4.5 crop in cameras. So.
That drives me nuts, man. At least it's not baked into our raw files. But the lack of a 4.5 drives me bonkers.
what do you post-processing in, Murray, for your black and white? Like, and maybe that's transition, but what are you using for post-processing?
I basically do everything in Lightroom. 98, 99% of stuff in Lightroom.
Gotcha.
You guys were mentioning sort of, I guess, how your editing has changed. And there was certainly a stage in my editing journey where I found myself taking things into Photoshop more often and doing heavier processing using luminosity masks and all sorts of, complex editing techniques. And the more and more that I've done that, the more and more I now revert back to trying to keep things as simple as possible. And, doing just really soft selection masks as they would have done in the darkroom. And, you can get really natural looking effects doing really simple adjustments. And so that's where I've kind of landed at the moment, is often now if I'm having to take something into Photoshop and spend, an hour editing something, it actually doesn't make it into a final collection or portfolio. It's not something, it's something that I'm trying to force because I think maybe there's something there.
Right.
As opposed to something that's like, shot it in the right light, great composition.
Yep.
You need to do a little bit of contrast and jobs are good in.
Yeah, I mean, the most beautiful thing in the world is when you nail everything in the field and you get it back and you barely feel like you need to tweak the raw file because it was that good of a moment, or, you nailed everything you needed to nail and you're like, okay, I need to do a couple little things. And then like 5 minutes, I'm done. It doesn't happen a lot, but it's so nice when it does. And Jeffrey, you've shifted away from Photoshop too.
Yeah, I have. I'm pretty much predominantly Lightroom these days. Very rarely leave it. And it's interesting. And Michael, I think you've used Lightroom forever. I don't know how much, but I used to do similar to Murray, get in and do the luminosity masks and all of that tweaking and extra. And I sometimes wonder if it was a situation where I felt like I had to similar to you have to shoot RAW to be a landscape photographer versus JPEG. And I sometimes wonder if I did that because I felt like you have to be in Photoshop to say you edited your photo. And if it's my mindset that's changed, or that along the way the Lightroom tools have improved to the point that there's even less technical reason to jump into Photoshop as well. But yeah, I've definitely gone. I'm with Murray. I try not to have to go into Photoshop, and really Adobe's improvements have made that way easier, I feel like, than it used to be.
Yeah. Murray, were you going to say something?
No, I agree with Jeffrey's point there. It's sort of, I think it's also a case of you venture into the unknown to learn where the boundaries are. And then once you've sort of explored those options and okay, this is how far I can push processing and this is how far I can take things, whether that's going in and doing Orton effects or, stuff like that, then you can decide either ethically, morally, or just creatively where you draw the line on what your creative vision is.
Yeah.
And I think potentially if you don't go and explore those options, then there's going to be something in the back of your mind that's like, you feel as though your processing could improve, or there's something that you're missing that you don't know about yet because you haven't gone and explored it. So I think it is a worthwhile endeavor to just go and give it a try, learn some of these more complex things for the sake of learning them.
Right.
And then you can always step back and, reassess and get back to subtle.
Yeah. Yeah, you both have hit on things that impacted me at various points. And Jeffrey, yes, I've basically used Lightroom since day one, even going way back, and before I even was looking at photography as something I did normally. I can't remember for what reason, but I downloaded Lightroom. We'll just leave it at that. And it was like it was just like point and shoot camera files. At the time, I don't think camera phones were really a thing yet, and I was just playing around and had no clue what I was doing. And even when I started getting back into photography, it was still very much that. It was like, well, I knew Lightroom, and to me, Photoshop was always more of the like graphic artist tool. I never even thought early on of using Photoshop for photos, which is ironic since it's in the name, but what do I know? But I just always found Photoshop to be overwhelming. Like there's so much that you can do and there's so much in there. And Jeffrey, much like our conversation with Sarah, it's more of an investment of time issue, I'm sure, than a lack of ability issue. But right. I've always found Lightroom could do what I needed it to do for my style. And I think that's important to call out too, is my style. Yeah. I think all three of us have very similar styles. Right. Somebody might want to push their photos far further in terms of the processing. Lightroom has advanced a lot, but it still doesn't quite come up to snuff with Photoshop in terms of luminosity masking and the smoothness of edges on masks and stuff like that. It's gotten better, but it's not quite there yet. But Jeffrey, you had touched on not knowing whether you were in Photoshop because you felt like you needed to be in Photoshop because that's what everybody that knew, quote unquote, what they were talking about or knew what they were doing said, you have to use Photoshop. Mm-hmm. In 2020, I went down that path. I was like, well, I guess I should learn Photoshop. I had so many people telling me Lightroom can't do it. You're never going to be a proper photographer just using Lightroom. And, I'm looking at my work. I'm like, I think it looks really nice, but whatever. And I purchased several tutorials from several of the big names and I went through them and it's like, I saw the value, but it felt like so much more work to get a result that really wasn't that different than what I was already capable of achieving in Lightroom. And also, as my mom used to love to point out, the Rung family is all stubborn Germans. So for me, it was like the Wharton effect in Lightroom. That was very much a but I know I can figure out how to do this in Lightroom without having to go into Photoshop. So I'm going to figure it out. So there's been a little bit of that too, I will readily admit. But I also think that's kind of fun. Like, okay, Lightroom technically doesn't have this tool, but how can I do the same thing? And that's something going through all those tutorials that I kept seeing over and over again. I was like, okay, well, they're doing it this way in Photoshop, but I know in Lightroom I can just do this and this and basically achieve the same outcome. So why make the switch? Why move away from the raw processor that is Lightroom, which is based on Adobe Camera Raw? Why do it? And part of me did feel, kind of getting to the black and white versus color, like, well, if I want to lead workshops or teach people, I should probably know both sides. And I still feel that way to an extent, but I do feel like over the last 3-4 years, especially with the advancements Adobe has made to Lightroom, that more and more people are saying what you said, Murray, like, 98, 99% of the time now, I'm doing everything just in Lightroom. Yeah. So if anything, the rest of the world's just catching up to me. So, but
and even I think a lot of people who do process in Photoshop, a lot of the work that they're doing is probably in the Camera Raw suite.
Yes, exactly.
To, going into layers and adjustment layers and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of a disconnect there with some of the terminology or even awareness. Like, hey man, Adobe Camera Raw, that is Lightroom and Lightroom is Adobe Camera Raw. There are some variances. I would argue that Lightroom is better because you've got history panel and print module and all this other stuff too. But I think there's admittedly ignorance on the Lightroom side of the house, and I think there's some ignorance on those who have just been using Photoshop since day one and not realizing how capable Lightroom has really become over the years. But anyways, I don't want this to be a discussion of just the software tools per se. No. But also, in terms of changes and the processing. And Jeffrey, you and I have touched on this a little bit with, talking about some of our past edits. I think in the Q&A session we did, the host Q&A session, we both talked about our cringeworthy past edits. But I guess, can you touch on a little bit? Obviously, Murray went from black and white to color, but that was more of an aesthetic change as opposed to like a post-processing approach per se. But how is your actual or has your post-processing beyond that shift to color or from to color from black and white, has it actually changed, or is it just applying what you were doing to a different aesthetic?
No, I think there is they are completely different skills for me anyway. So when I was doing a lot of black and white work, I guess some of my inspirations were, people like Sebastião Salgado, who are doing the, very high contrast, almost chiaroscuro aesthetic images where you've got really rich blacks and bright whites. And so a lot of my black and white work tends towards that style of being fairly high contrast. And as you mentioned, that is a thing that potentially doesn't actually look very natural or aesthetically pleasing when you do convert into color. You get all sorts of saturation, weirdness, and hue shifts, and funny things happening.
Yeah.
So coming from that world, shifting to color was a fairly big adjustment, and almost relearning how to edit an image from scratch. And I'll give credit to Benjamin Mays, who's sort of, I guess, his work in some ways brought my attention to the importance of shadow values in color work. And I think everyone harps on about midtone contrast all the time. And my hot take is that I think midtone contrast is a bunch of bullshit.
You heard it here.
Wow. The comments, it can be left for Murray in the
you're full of
Patreon.
shit.
Yeah, it's great. I don't think
You
I've
can
heard.
clip that one and put it on YouTube.
That's awesome.
I think you should be focusing on highlight contrast. Keep your shadows fairly low contrast, retain the shadow detail, and then build contrast in the highlights. And that's going to help achieve, for me anyway, that's what I aim for, because that's what's going to help me achieve that sort of vibrancy that I was looking for in my black and white work, in my color work, while not just absolutely crushing things and making it look all funny in the shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my sort of, I guess, big takeaway and the aha moment, I suppose. So yeah, credit to Ben Mays for making me realize that, not necessarily explicitly, but
Right.
I have a distinct memory of looking through some of his work and being like, oh wow, okay, that's the vibe, that's the look that I've been trying to achieve. Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say on highlights specifically, I feel, and I see it especially with newer photographers, but there is a great fear of having any clipping of highlights, even in parts of the scene where there really should be. Like if the sun is directly in the scene, they're cranking the highlights so low that I presume that the clipping warnings go away, but now all the highlights are gray.
Yeah.
Then that's something that I would struggle with too. Like any little speck that was flagged as clipping, I would go in and I'd dodge it down until it wasn't, not to the point of it going gray, but just enough to get rid of the clipping warnings. And I've certainly become more willing to have leeway there in terms of like, hey, you know what, those little 4 pixels on that branch that are clipping, like that's perfectly fine. I don't need to worry about that, which has sped things up a lot too. But anyways, that interjection aside, Jeffrey, I think you were going to chime in on this one too.
From which perspective? Because I'm still getting over the midtone contrast is junk.
Midtones are
statement,
bullshit.
which is great.
I'll have to make that the title of the episode. Actually, that would probably be a great title. No, I would say just in terms of how your processing style has changed in terms
I'll recover here then.
how far you're going or how subtle you are or whatever.
For me, I think I followed the traditional path. You get into Lightroom your first time and say, oh, check out these sliders. And if I crank this over to like 65, 70, man, I get this. This looks different, and different was good. And so much of my stuff in the beginning was global edits, which I find weird. My brain had a disconnect between global edits and local edits because I don't know why, but local edits never clicked for me. If someone had called it targeted edits or target adjustments, that would have helped me so much. It's just a mental block I had. But for me, I think that's where my editing came from. Beyond just the too heavy of swings with sliders in those early days and starting to rein that in, the changing from trying to make the whole image look good via global edits as opposed to using global edits to sort of neutralize the file to a degree and then use the targeted local adjustments to bring things in where I wanted them. I think that's where my shift was. because now my global edits are much more about, let's make this a little more even across the frame, and then I will use masks or brushes or things like that to bring up or bring down certain areas that I want to do. But in the beginning, I was trying to make the whole photo look good with global adjustments and then some local adjustments from there. But for me, I think that's where the shift was to it. Hopefully, it's made an improvement over time. I always say I've got tons to learn with editing and refining and everything like that. But that's where the shift was for me, the global to local, and then almost a mindset shift of using global to even the file out, and then do some targeted work to colors and shadows and highlights. And I guess I won't be doing mid-tone contrast anymore, but...
Well, I have another Murray Livingston style hot take, Jeffrey, that it's not aimed at you, but I think flattening your file globally is kind of bullshit.
Oh, man, you guys are tearing my editing apart. Flattening, get the mid-tone contrast back in. I feel like I'm indirectly being told, Jeffrey, your editing could really use some work.
Now, what I'm speaking to specifically is I've watched tutorials and I see people talk about it of every file. The first thing I do is I take the highlight slider to -100 and the shadow slider to plus 100. And I flatten it out. I don't know if that's how extreme you're going.
I am not going that extreme. I'm like bringing it into more of a middle ground, but wow.
And that's fine. I
if
do
the
that
highlights
too.
are where they are, then why are you changing them?
Yeah.
If they need to be there, then...
Sometimes
that's
I
awesome.
raise
That's
my
great.
highlights globally. So anyways,
No, that's great.
there's a million ways to approach it. As long as you're getting the end result that you want, to each their own, have at it. I don't really care, but I do think that whole pushing the sliders all the way down or all the way up for your highlights and shadows, what's the point? Because you're going to build back up to the brightest that you want, presumably through a local adjustment, aka through a mask. Anyways, so why not just leave it and work in your other tonal areas, which is kind of how I approach it. I do drop my highlights a touch, depending on the image, maybe 15 to 30 points. And I raise my shadows a touch, again, depending on the image. But most of the work I'm doing,
you
my
reduce your
masking,
global contrast slider a touch.
I do, yeah. So I usually take my global contrast to -15 to -30, depending on the image. Generally, if it's a higher contrast image, I drop it down around -30. If it's a lower contrast, I might do -15. And then I set my tone curve, which is in my tone curve video. If you want to go watch that, I talk about this stuff. I just lost. Oh, the contrast piece specifically, and again, I think I do talk about it in that video. Apparently, I'm going from micro fry on this, I believe. Years ago in the Lightroom ecosystem, they changed the algorithm on the contrast slider. So today's 0 on the contrast slider is the equivalent of -30 on the contrast slider in the before days. I do it, though, because I want to control my contrast more with more refinement or in a more targeted manner, which is where the tone curve comes in, and then the local adjustments and masks on top of that. But I do think anybody that tells you this is the hard and fast rule in terms of how you approach your editing, especially in a tool like Lightroom where it's non-destructive, and so much of what I do is going back and forth anyways. Like the first adjustments I make, I'm probably going to go back and tweak those as I make other adjustments, whether it's on colors or making a mask adjustment on a particular part of the image or what have you. So it's very iterative. I can never tell somebody okay, well, I go through and I do this on my highlights and I don't touch them again. I do this on my shadows and I don't touch them again. I very much will go back and usually touch those global sliders several times. I'll go in and tweak a mask, maybe multiple times.
And one of your points that you were just making there was maybe the other thing that was the shift for me was or something that I carried over from black and white, was approaching the image in tonality first, and then changing color, saturation, etc. secondary. Yeah. And often I found that adjusting tonality sorted out all the other issues in the image. And so when we're talking about adjusting highlights, just adjusting shadows, really adjusting tonality of the image, right? Right. And if you almost visualize it as black and white, then strip away that color information, and it becomes a totally different ballgame, I think.
Yeah, basically walking through, if I were to do a quick workflow walkthrough, I set my profile in the Adobe or in the profile panel. I usually do start by setting my color temp. That's the only color I do early on. And everything else, to your point, Murray, is all around tonality. Then I'll go into like my color grading and point color and making those adjustments. Then usually from there, I go into my masking and start doing my more targeted or localized adjustments. And then maybe I have to go back and, again, tweak the tonality piece. But I think what you just brought up is a great point, especially also changing the tonality, depending on the tool you're using, will often change the colors, whether it be in the intensity or even the hue a little bit, like the white slider in Lightroom. If you push it really hard, it can shift your colors a little bit, especially in like the warmer tones. They've added the saturation adjustment on the tone curve tool now, where it used to be you adjust your tone curve and colors would get maybe too saturated. Now you can control that a little bit more, but all that tonality stuff you're doing is potentially from one tonality tool to another, you're going to change how those colors look. So why do anything with your colors first and then go in and basically blow up all the work you just did on your colors by then focusing on the tonality? So I do think if we want to say there's no hard and fast rules, maybe that's a pretty solid rule, is maybe work on your tonality stuff before you start worrying about the colors.
Yeah. Can I ask a question of you guys? Is that all right? Is that allowed?
No, it's not allowed on this podcast.
Oh, what a shame. One thing that I thought might be interesting for people is, obviously we've all done, workshops, and Michael, you've done a lot of Lightroom editing education over the years through your YouTube channel. I thought maybe you guys might want to touch on what are some of the sort of easy mistakes that you see people making the most frequent, and things that are easy fixes that are going to help people improve.
You want to take that first, Jeffrey, or you want me to swing at it?
I may need to process it if you have something at the top of your head.
You're still caught up on midtones and flattening your image.
Yes.
Okay. So I already touched on one, is the whole highlight thing. Like, you want to control your highlights, but I guess maybe I'm being a little pretentious here, but sometimes I look at some of the images I see on social media. I'm like, how can you not see that you've turned your highlights gray? Like, maybe that's the aesthetic you want to go for, but I doubt it. And that could be monitor calibration. I don't know. Maybe they're just seeing it very differently on their screen than what I'm seeing. So I would say definitely, this goes back to the whole subtlety joke that I said that my clients probably get sick of hearing, is for the most part, you don't want to go too extreme on anything. Like an image, I might push my clarity, but I'm not going to push it too far, because then you start getting that weird edge crunchiness and haloing and stuff like that. You pull those highlights down too far, you're going to get the weird grayness in your brightest highlights. Push the shadows too high, suddenly you've got a very unnatural looking image. You're almost getting that like HDR of the early 2000s kind of look, where everything is so clearly visible, yet we don't see that way with our own eyes. So it's not a good match to have if you're going for a natural aesthetic. What's another one? We may have to.
I think that's a pretty good point. It's sort of people lacking intentionality with the decisions that they're making in the editing suite. So just
I think
doing
part of that comes
because,
with experience.
Yeah, for sure.
It's hard to be intentional if you don't know. Maybe you can see what you want, but you don't know how to get there. But again, it's non-destructive, so tweak and play. What you got, Jeffrey?
Well, first, I think your points are all
midtones.
No. I think your points are all good, but I think the one recurring theme that I see from workshops and people that show up and just the editing questions I get and the editing sessions I've done, is a lot of people, at least coming through my workshops, I don't think are as far along with their editing as the three of us. With me being the low man on a totem pole who apparently was doing mid-tone contrast wrong. But because I feel like some of the things I show, like a workshop, Michael did it in the Smokies, and I've done it at other workshops. I'll just go through sort of a basic edit, like what I do to take a photo from start to finish without digging into the super nitty-gritty details. And I almost feel like a lot of times that's even a step further than some of the folks on a workshop. And some of that's probably who I sort of target my workshops towards, which is more beginner to intermediate photographers than necessarily advanced. But so I feel like there's a lot of basics to teach. It's not so much they're doing stuff wrong per se, though I think some of the things Michael's highlighted, that's sort of the things you do wrong early on, right? Yeah, because like you said, people preach that don't blow out your highlights. And if you see any little bit of clipping in the highlights, you're trying to fix it and leads to the problems we all know. But I think that's what I would call out is we can discuss our mid-tone contrast. I'll bet 70% of the people listening are like, what? They think it's funny, but do they really get what's going on, there?
Right. Jeffrey's really offended, but I have no idea what they're talking about.
Right.
I think that's a good point. It is hard to...
Yeah, that's just the one thing I think is the recurring theme I see is there's a hurdle to get into the editing, and people feel like they should be editing but have a hard time doing it. I think a lot of the crowds we hang out in, we are into the world of, is Lightroom or Photoshop better, or I can do this mask better, or even we know what luminosity mask is, but is that second nature to some people? So for me, I think that's where I see a lot with Michael having identified early mistakes, I think, as you're getting used to editing.
Yeah.
And that's another great call out is for all of us, I assume, the three of us, it is hard to kind of place yourself back in the shoes you were in 5-10 years ago. And I will say, like, from my standpoint, like I said, starting out in Lightroom, I had no clue what I was doing. I didn't know anything about non-destructive. All that stuff was completely foreign to me. I just went in and played. I didn't know, like at one point I would edit the file, I would export it, and I would delete the original file. So, there's hard lessons to be learned sometimes. Yeah, bold move, Cotton. Let's see how that plays out. Fortunately for me, those were phone images. It wasn't like I was taking a file that ended up being in my portfolio long term or anything, but it is very much the you don't know what you don't know. And part of what spurred me to start my YouTube channel and start doing these Lightroom tutorials that I've done over the years was feeling like so many of the tutorials that were out there weren't teaching about the tools so much as the approach. So you didn't necessarily understand truly what you were doing by doing X, Y, and Z.
Yes.
So I've tried to delve into a little bit more. Like I don't have a video other than my editing and high key video. I don't think I've really got a video out there that shows step by step my workflow of how I edited an image. It's all more centered around the tools and how they work and how to get the most out of them, so that hopefully then somebody that watches one of my videos can then take that and apply it to their own work. And I would say that to me, a big mistake starting out would be trying to jump right into Photoshop before you even figured out Lightroom or anything, because of the fact that Lightroom is non-destructive. And one of the things that drove me nuts trying to work in Photoshop back in 2020 as I was going through those tutorials is, oh, well, now you got to flatten this and da-da-da-da, and then suddenly like you're kind of baked in. And how many times do you see somebody in the Discord or somewhere else? More so I feel again in the past is Lightroom has become more accepted and more powerful. You don't see it quite as much, but like, oh, well, I had this, 35 layer edit and I screwed something up on layer 5. And I'm very much dumbing the terminology down here, I know. But, because of that and because of it not being non-destructive, I had to start all over. It's just like, that sounds horrible. But especially for somebody first starting out.
Yeah.
Again, Lightroom, anything you do in Lightroom, as long as you're not an idiot like me and deleting the original file, hit that reset button, then you can start all over. Go back in your history, find a spot that you were happy with before you started making some other stuff and maybe went down a path you don't like. Go back to that history step, start working from there again. It's non-destructive. You're not going to be stuck with what you've got, whether it's in the editing phase, whether you feel like you finished the edit, now you want to go back. You can change it. So in that regard, Lightroom, Adobe Camera Raw are far easier because you're not going to have anything baked in that you can't change without either scrapping layers or just starting over.
Or even jumping and doing a virtual copy and purposely editing one file to one style and then doing the virtual copy in high key or low key or changing it up. And then, as you said, I mean, I guess my thing that I've seen most frequently is people don't necessarily have a vision of where they're trying to get the file to. So even if they know the tools and what each tool does in a general sense, there's not a sense of how do I combine these things together to get the result that I'm looking for. And I think that is something that comes out of experience and experimentation. And I think that's such a great thing that working Lightroom does, is that it is non-destructive and that you can go and make 5 different versions of something in 10 minutes really quickly and easily, and get a sense of, okay, this image in the scene is going to look best if I go down this route. And then you can follow that and, get to a place that you're happy with.
Yeah. Virtual copies are phenomenal. And typically these days I kind of know where I'm headed, but you're absolutely right. And I've got some images where I like color and black and white. So I've got a virtual copy that's one and a virtual copy that's the other, but it hasn't happened often, but maybe they'll end up in my portfolio. Both of them. The equivalent, and I think for all three of us, we're talking primarily in terms of Lightroom Classic, which is my recommendation that you use still, although Lightroom Desktop, Lightroom Cloud, aka the one that just has LR on the logo, it has closed the gap significantly in terms of functionality, especially from an editing standpoint. They're pretty on par. You've got versions in that version of Lightroom, which would be the closest equivalent to virtual copies. And not to go on the rabbit hole, there's other ways you can do it. You've got snapshots in Lightroom Classic that can kind of do the same thing. So there's multiple ways you can go in and try different paths or different approaches to the same image. Because again, you're not editing the file itself. You're imaging, or you're editing a preview of what you're doing, for lack of a better way to put it without going down the whole technical deep rabbit hole. So yeah, I think that's a great point. And I definitely, as I already said, like, at the very least, start in Lightroom. Don't put more hurdles in front of yourself than you're already going to have just learning photography to begin with. Going back again to, hey, start out shooting JPEG, figure that out, get yourself to a point where you're happy with the foundational basis of your work. Then maybe you can start shooting RAW. Or Jeffrey, you had mentioned most cameras, if not all cameras these days, as far as mirrorless or even the DSLRs, you've got the ability to shoot RAW and it'll save a JPEG version of it. So you've got both options for every file. It's just storage, and JPEGs are much smaller, so it's not even that much storage.
To circle back to one of Murray's super early points about learning to see the light and things like that, I mean, that skill pays off in the editing so much because you're not saving files with heavy editing. You're enhancing or bringing it back to the way you saw it. So I just think that's super important.
Yes, and we touched on that. Was it with episode with Matt? I can't recall. But anyways, probably the biggest shift I've had in my editing is I'm doing so much less these days. And even it's more so I'm doing less to the image, but I'm getting the same or really usually better results by doing less. I used to go in and again, this kind of comes from the tutorials you watched or workshops I attended, and then the post-processing lessons part of that where, okay, well, you see this tree and this side of the tree is darker than the left side of the tree. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to brush in and emphasize the brightness on the left side of the tree, and I'm going to darken the right side. So I'd have all these masks of these little itty bitty adjustments and everything. I go back and look at some of my old files, and part of it is the difference in the change when Lightroom rolled out masking in 2021 versus pre-masking when you just had local adjustments where you had to make a new adjustment for basically everything. But I would have like, oh my gosh, when it got converted over to mask, I think I've got some older images that have like 40 or 50 masks, and trying to figure out what in the world I was doing. And, I'm going in and looking at it, and it's like, oh, well, there's this little itty bitty circle that when I was zoomed in at 100%, I dodged it a bit, or like I was doing all this work and it really didn't make that much of an impact on the image in the end. Whereas now I'm to the point, like, I can't remember if I've talked about it on the podcast yet, but one of my common steps, and I think, Murray, this kind of goes to your point about building contrast in the highlights. One of the last things I do in my masking approach is I've got a preset brush that's a low flow. It's a white adjustment set to, I think, plus 30. And I just kind of go around and I loosely brush over the brighter parts of the image to help pull those highlights out a little bit more, because the whites are going to impact the brighter parts more than they impact the darker points. I'm not, I think it was Charles Kramer. Is that his name? Gosh.
Yeah.
Older photographer. That was at the Audio Yosemite conference I attended, and he talked about his sloppy approach to editing. And that has always stuck with me for the last 5 years. So maybe I lashed onto that too much because it means I can be a little lazier. But I'm not going in and doing all these little itty bitty, like, oh, these 10 pixels are not quite where I want them. Except at the end of the day,
less is more.
Less is more. And at the end of the day, at a normal viewing, nobody's holding a print 2 inches from their nose. Nobody's looking at the phone or the computer screen inches away or zoomed into 100% like we do with editing, especially with a 45 megapixel crop set or a 45 megapixel sensor, which 100% on that is equal to 150% on my older camera. Like, I guess that would be a starting out point too. Like, you gotta know when to limit yourself and when to stop the pixel peeping, and especially with these newer cameras that have such higher pixel densities, like zoom to 100%. A lot of times it's just ridiculous these days because you're never going to need to be that close into an image.
There's just more important things to place your attention, your energy into.
Yes.
Yeah.
Focus on composition, focus on emotion, focus on light. How does that image make you feel? That's way more important to me than whether, you brighten that little bit of the tree by 5%.
Yep.
So
100%.
Murray, you just hit directly on a question I highlighted like 5 minutes ago that I wanted to make sure we get to. And that question is, do you edit to match how the scene looked or how it felt or something else entirely? And I think to your point, if you want to dive into the feel part a little bit more, and I think we talked about in the AI episode a bit too, but I think that's important in terms of where to go with your processing.
I guess hopefully how it looked is how it felt, which is potentially a more subtle variation than, it being black or white, one or the other. And then that all goes back to photographing a scene in the right conditions. I feel as though if I'm not photographing it in those conditions that it's made me feel like that, I'm not going to have that connection with the image in the first place. And sort of faking that emotion in the editing suite doesn't feel as genuine to me. So yes, to a point, I'm editing for the feel. But the feel is what I felt on location. And usually that means editing to what it actually looked like.
Yeah, and I think there's a distinction there in terms of maybe how you would have liked to have felt in the moment versus how you actually felt in the moment. And if you're faking that feeling in the processing, then you're probably taking an image that maybe isn't what you really want it to be anyways, and you're trying to turn it into that. For me, I would say, and I think we talked about it in the AI episode, but it's I want to represent to the viewer how I felt. But only I know what was really catching my eye or what was drawing my attention within the broader scene. So, maybe I remember being freezing cold and there was a cold wind, and maybe that's going to make me edit it a little bit cooler than what it truly looked like, because I'm trying to convey that sense of frigid air and being cold in the moment. Or maybe I remember the sunlight filtering through the trees, so I'm going to emphasize that a little bit more than the literal representation of, like, again, not just shooting a JPEG, like, okay, here's what it was, and this is exactly what it looked like, but I'm trying to convey what that experience and everything was to me standing there in the moment at the scene with the experience and everything.
The photograph is so much more than just the literal pixels that were recorded, right?
Yeah. And our eyes see differently than just a snapshot of a moment. We see the changing light, and we interpret it just automatically in our mind's eye, and we're looking at the highlights and the shadows, and whereas in the image file, maybe the blacks are crushed or the highlights are super, super bright. But when we're there, our eyes are adjusting and our mind's eye is adjusting. So it's taking that into account as well, that impacts how it felt and how it truly felt to see it from an artistic standpoint, as opposed to literally seeing it, which would be just a straight, I'm going to recreate or truly 100% represent exactly what it was. which if that's what you want to do, great. But man, you're going to have to rely on some fantastic conditions all the time and maybe fall a little bit short in terms of helping the viewer see what you saw and experienced, which is where I think the distinction comes in.
Yeah. Inserting a little bit of your own artistry into the photograph.
Yeah. And not to go on a tangent, but I think this is where I get frustrated with the whole decade, century long argument of, is photography art? Like, I'm not just going out and literally capturing what I saw with my eyes and calling it a day. I'm trying to capture and then tease out so much more than the literal representation. And Jeffrey, you've talked before about a landscape painter and putting their artistic and creative interpretation and probably also, again, like how it truly felt versus what they truly saw. To me, for me at least, in my approach to post-processing, it is so much more than just photography. Like, to tell me I'm not creating a form of art is frankly a little insulting.
I mean, through our editing, we can we can control where the eye goes. We can control warmth and coolness and all of that. And, you know, all three of us are going to do it differently. We could all stand at the same scene. And to your point, Michael, what caught your attention? You might have been cold. I might have noticed some light off in the distance, and Murray might have noticed some texture or some other layer thing happening. And so when we edit, we're all Murray wants to look at the layers. You want people to feel a little cool. I want people to look over here at the light. So we're all going to have our different impressions of an exact same scene. And the editing gives us the tools to pull that out of the image and get the viewer to look, whether, you know, by directing their eye through our edit. So I think that's immensely important.
So that kind of leads to the other question I highlighted on here, which is, how do you know when your edit's done on a given image?
It's never done.
Never done. To some extent, I actually think I agree with you, Jeffrey.
Yeah.
I just always feel different.
Got something right.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I have to go fix mid-tone contrast and like years of work.
Yeah, exactly. You're going to go and re-edit your entire portfolio.
Exactly. It's going to be busy. But yeah,
I mean, I always point to, the old Ansel Adams. If you go and look at Moonrise over Hernandez over the course of Ansel's life, the amount of different ways that he printed that same image is astonishing.
Yeah.
And, so what keeps all of us from, shifting things as we change as people, as we evolve as artists? Yeah, of course, you can go back and re-edit something. You've got complete artistic liberty to go and do that. Absolutely.
And I take a very similar approach with my printing to his development for print, is like producing a box set. Every box set, I will typically run a proofing set, because maybe this week I see something a little bit differently and I want to tweak it. So I don't generally have drastic changes, but I do have some images where somebody's bought a print 2 years ago and it looks the way it looks. And somebody that buys the print this week, it might be printed a little bit differently because I've just evolved in the way I'm seen. I've evolved creatively, artistically, whatever. And now I see a different way to approach it to represent what I think is, or provide a better representation in that truest final form of the image, which is the print. I don't go back and make too many digital only adjustments, although I certainly have. But for me, it's mostly when it comes to that printing time and it comes off the printer, I'm like, oh, you know what? I still like this, but now that I'm looking at it with fresh eyes, weeks or months or years later, I think I want to tweak A, B, and C or what have you. But Jeffrey, it's hard to say when it's done. And I know really what the heart of this question is probably getting at, from our friend Chad, GPT, is for the layperson who's just editing for fun, for hobby, whatever. Not necessarily from a profession, but certainly that too. But how do you know when enough is enough, when it's done? And I think that's probably something that everybody struggles with in their journey. Like for me, what's the common gripe that you hear from photographers is, I finished the edit, I posted it on social media, and I looked at it the next day and I hated it. Yep. And how to know that? I think at some point you just got to, it goes back to that feeling. It's a feeling. It goes to experience, and not rushing it. I swung the pendulum too far. I used to edit and share immediately. Now, and then I switched to, I'd edit and then I would sit on it for like months and then I would go back to it. And then I just ended up with a whole mountain of images that I wasn't releasing because I swung the pendulum too far the other way. But yeah, Murray, you're absolutely right. Like at some point, it's just kind of that gut feeling that I'm happy with this. The other thing that I was going to touch on earlier, I forgot to mention, is in terms of pushing sliders too far, not enough, but typically too far, is a lot of times what I'll do is when I do identify I want to make an adjustment. Hey, I want to increase the saturation of the reds in this tree to make them pop a little bit more. A lot of times I'll make that adjustment, but then I'll immediately pull it back 5-10 points because I know in the moment,
it's a good tip.
My eyes haven't quite acclimated yet. So odds are when I go back a day or two later and look at it again, I'm going to feel that I pushed it too far. So I just kind of rope it in right in the moment, is push it, but pull it back a little bit, maybe 5-10%. And then if I go back in a couple of days and I feel like it still needs to be maybe pushed a little bit further, I feel more confident in knowing that I truly have that room to push, as opposed to going back a couple of days later and going, dude, those reds are now like cherry lollipop red. What were you?
You baked it.
What were you thinking? Yeah. Right. I overbaked it. So, but yeah, I think that the question of when is it done, again, I don't know that anybody out there can give you a definitive answer for, especially for any individual person. Like everybody's finish line is going to be different. It's just experience and knowing to trust your process. And over time, knowing too, like, okay, I've now published 20 images, and when I've gone back and looked at them, I've realized I needed to tweak things. You start to learn what are those things that you're consistently wanting to tweak after the fact. So you just add that thoughtfulness into your active processing to begin with, and again, learn
Hopefully
from experience.
Don't make the same mistake twice.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes you do. So. All right, so we're coming up on well over an hour at this point, so I think let's wind this down with kind of a final topic we can talk about. And Jeffrey and I talked about this offline a few days ago with regards to editing styles specifically, is there's been a noticeable difference, maybe less so these days than even 5 years ago, but historically I think there's been a noticeable difference in the approaches and the editing styles that we've seen from, say, a photographer based in the United States versus a photographer based in Europe or the UK specifically, is what comes to mind with somebody like a Simon Baxter or yourself, Murray, or even a Japanese photographer. It seems like there's these kind of cultural or societal impacts that kind of filter into the post-processing. So I thought kind of just close this conversation out, get the two of your thoughts on that and anything that you've observed, and maybe we can delve into why we think that is.
Will I go first?
Sure.
Yes.
Blow Jeffrey's mind again.
Yes, I know, right? Like, finish it out strong, Mary. Like, just.
I think my consensus that I've thought about this as well is, in general, people are responding to the landscapes that they're photographing. We're at our hearts probably people who take deep care in noticing what's around us, and the European landscape, by comparison to what you guys have got in the States, is much less colorful. And so I do sometimes wonder if that is, what's resulted in perhaps a more subtle style that's evolved, certainly in the UK. Mm-hmm. You pointed to Simon Baxter. My thoughts immediately go to Joe Cornish as well.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And, the UK in particular, it's pretty low saturation out here. Once in a blue moon, we get really vibrant colors in autumn. But usually it's pretty brown and murky and overcast, and the kind of light that we tend to get also plays into that. So I think that's where, that subtlety comes from, is actually more just a response to the kinds of light and the environments that we tend to photograph here. I wonder if, Michael, you've come to Ireland before.
Yes.
Did you find that, you were having to change the way that you photographed or edited the images because things were, I don't know, maybe you were here in summer, weren't you, or spring?
Yeah.
So it was pretty vibrant greens. But
yeah, I was going to say, I think for at least the time I was there, not so much. Also, when I was last there, which breaks my heart that it was 6 years ago, but I was already kind of into my quieter style, my more subtle style anyways. So if anything, a lot of my Ireland photos are a little bit more vibrant than what I typically photograph, like in the desert Southwest or here in Texas. You just don't have that vibrancy of color, especially the greens. Oh my God, the greens.
Greens are a different world, aren't they?
Yeah, I definitely think if I went over to the UK, like for me, it would be a pretty natural dip into the pool, so to speak, because again, of my particular style and approach anyways. I've found great inspiration and admiration of the UK photographers. Yeah, and I think that lends to a lot of the landscapes we are shooting. But, it's interesting you talk about how kind of the geography of the landscape may play a bigger role. Like to me, I was thinking more, it's also societal. I look at as an American, you think of the trope that we're loud and bombacious and little brash at times, and then a lot of the processing you see from American photographers could maybe delve into that as well. The funny thing is, even on this podcast, I'm like, Murray's so quiet, and I feel like I'm yelling. And in my international travel, I feel that way.
The artists that the UK produced, all sort of had more of that quieter style as well. I think of sort of the romantic tradition of John Constable and those kinds of paintings. All that kind of stuff, the cultural baggage definitely weighs into it for sure. Yeah.
But I do think you've hit on a good point, because like, I guess the one big, bold landscape, and not necessarily colorful, but just impactful landscape that comes to mind from a European standpoint is the Dolomites. And I would say there you see a lot of processing that would maybe remind me more of what I would see from an American photographer photographing the mountains and doing the editing there. So yeah, I think you may have hit the nail pretty firmly on the head. I do think, yes, there's probably a significant societal and cultural impacts as well. I mean, how couldn't there be when you're steeped in it from birth or whatever? And to your point, you standing on the shoulders of giants and the people that you came up admiring, then that's obviously going to have an influence on you as well. But yeah, I think the geography probably does play a big piece of it too. I don't know, Jeffrey, what are your thoughts on this one?
So I was going to go more towards we mirror what we consume, and then it starts to create sort of a snowball effect, I think. So and that's not to say I don't consume, photography from, international photographers. I do, but if you were probably to map out who I follow and who I watch most closely, they're probably going to be U.S. based just by nature of how the algorithms probably feed me stuff. So yeah, I've got Murray's photos in my feeds and other photographers in my feed like that. But I'm wondering if that's some of we just get in this echo chamber, which can also play into we got American photographers photographing American environment or U.S. environments, the bold colors. So therefore, this chamber gets that type of style versus the UK where it's more subtle, less of the color. So the geography is influencing those photographers, and then it's magnified by that. I'm going to say echo chamber, even though I don't mean it in the normal negative fashion of it, but it's the silos feedback loop. There you go, something like that. So because they're just not getting cross-pollinated quite as much, especially in a casual photographer. I think again, we're somewhat unique. We're probably following more photographers, more in tune with what someone's doing and noticing those differences. But that's where I could see it sort of coming from.
Great point. As a South African who lives in the UK, but also was born in the States, I make a point of trying to follow people from all over the world,
right?
And sort of breaking that, I guess, singular feedback loop. So no, that's a really interesting way to think about it. I think that's probably the case for most people.
Yeah, and then social media, I think there's two aspects to it. Social media, in one regard, doesn't help that silo effect because it's probably pushing you people that are geographically in the same region of the world as you. Yep. So it's not necessarily helping you break beyond the borders, so to speak. On the flip side, of course, it's also going to show you what's popular, and then people chase what's popular and trends, and then they implement that themselves. So that's where a lot of that feedback loop comes in. But you also have the ability, especially with as the social media platforms have evolved and it's easier to share things, and Instagram even sharing things to stories. I have found a ton of international photographers through the act of other people sharing their work which has definitely broken down those borders significantly. So, I feel like I've become unlocked to this whole world of photographers based in Japan over the last few years. And my gosh, just some absolutely gorgeous photography that I never really knew was out there, and, broke a lot of what I had in mind in terms of the stereotypes of the beauty of Japan. It's not just the cultural aspects of it, but my gosh, there's some landscapes there that I had no idea existed like that either. So, just like anything, there's good and bad around the social media aspect and everything too. But I do think it's I'll go back to the word you used, Jeffrey, the silo effect. And how do we break out of those silos and seek out alternatives? And it's not just social media that creates that. Even you look at books and the cost of purchasing a book internationally. We talk about that all the time in the Discord servers. Oh, this Australian photographer just released a book. I'd love to have it, but it's $70 just to ship the thing over. And then, like for a UK photographer buying Eric Bennett's book or something, you've got the import duties and everything on top of it that can make it very cost prohibitive to break out of those silos too. So I don't want to just point at social media algorithms and say that's to blame too. There's all kinds of barriers to it. And yeah, I think it behooves all of us to seek opportunities to break down those barriers and expand our horizons and see what else is out there. So, we'll end it on a we are the world kumbaya moment and say, embrace the beauty of the global environment out there and see what else is out there from a post-processing standpoint, to put a nice little bow on it, as well as just photography in general. But I think this is a great conversation. Alex, sorry you missed out on this one. I hope you slept in and got some good rest. But Murray, you were a fantastic guest.
Thank you, Murray.
I'm excited that you're able to join us.
Thanks for having me.
And any last words from either of you?
Nope.
Nothing from me.
I'll just say go into Lightroom and play. That's
awesome.
what it's all about. That's how you learn. So with that, again, jump over to our Patreon. Whether you're a free member or a paid member, you can participate in our post-episode discussions and give us feedback, thoughts, counterpoints, etc. And, bear with me for just a second. I almost forgot. I've got to give shout-outs. We've got 2 new folks that have decided to support us on Patreon. So talk amongst yourselves. I owe a shout-out and a huge thank you to Chris and Jonathan, who are our 2 latest paid members over on Patreon. So thank you so much for your support. Again, I've been really pleased and a little surprised by how quickly the Patreon has caught on in terms of paying members. But again, you can participate whether you're paid or not. So, and if you are a paid member for Focus Fan and above through the end of 2025, you also get early access to the episodes a week before anybody else. So with that, I'll throw it out there. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Take care. And until next time. Oh, I screwed that up. I screwed up my own outro. Until next time, take care.
Thanks, everybody.